Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the SoundPEATS Air3 Pro. So if you remember the last review I actually did the SoundPEATS Life set. So the Air3 Pro is sort of similar. It's the older set actually, and I was curious about it, so I'd asked if it was available, and they said, sure, we'll send it to you. So I do want to thank SoundPEATS for sending me both the Air3 Pro and the Life. So when we look at them sort of side by side, I think this is going to be maybe the new style or a newer style going forward. It's actually the more of the horizontal style case, and this is maybe more like an AirPod style case where it was more vertical. So this is what the Air3 Pro looks like, and what differentiated the Air3 Pro from Life we can kind of see on the back. So the Air3 Pro, sort of the big differentiator, is this Qualcomm 3046 chip, which actually brings you Qualcomm AptX adaptive, something that was missing on Life. Life was not a Qualcomm chip, it was a normal AAC codec. So that was one difference. And this one is also hybrid noise cancellation, and Life uses a different version. Let's see what they called it. They just called it active noise cancellation. So I think they did update their noise cancellation and pass-through mode because they're actually slightly better on Life than the previous Air3 Pro. And Air3 Pro only goes back, I think, 4 or 5 months. It's not all that old, but definitely the older set. So if we look at them maybe side by side on the graph, you'll sort of see they're not all that different. This is probably what SoundPEATS calls their classic EQ. This is probably their house sound. And so you can kind of see the two are actually pretty similar. The Air3 Pro has a very similar bassy sound to it, and it's just slightly more relaxed is how I would call it. So a little more relaxed here, a little more relaxed here, kind of a delayed pin to gain peak right there at probably at 3.5 or so, and just slightly lower levels here. So if you had asked me before I had actually listened to Life, what would Life sound like, I would have described exactly what Air3 Pro sounds like. Air3 Pro has this very much classic TWS sound. It's a sound signature. It's sort of this bassy, relaxed, casual. It works on music, it works on movies, it works on games, on podcasts. Just this general sound signature that's just very likable. Life, like I said, was more of a bass headset. It's a more musical set. It's sort of a more V-shaped set. Lots and lots of kind of musical touches added to the signature that don't really exist on Air3 Pro. Air3 Pro has this very traditional, if you were looking at any TWS within that sub $100 category, they would actually, most of them sound a lot like Air3 Pro. So yeah, it was kind of fascinating to listen to Life first, because Life, as I talked about, Life was very surprising how the signature sounded and how that dynamic driver sounded. And then to hear Air3 Pro second, I'm like, oh, this is actually what I was really expecting Life to sound like. And Life sounds nothing like Air3 Pro, but I understand why Air3 Pro sounds like Air3 Pro though. So we'll kind of jump into it now. And so like I said, the good part of Air3 Pro, what the differentiator is that Qualcomm 3046 chip gets you active, I think CFC, clear voice calling is another part of the Qualcomm chip. But mostly it's about AptX adaptive codec. So very high quality Bluetooth codec. This was AAC, this is AptX. So for those of you who use Samsung phones or Android phones in general, you'll get AptX. If you're on iOS, you're still on AAC on either one of them. So kind of a bonus for Android users. Hybrid noise cancellation, this one was okay. I think it's a little better on Life. The pass-through is definitely better on Life. And like I said, it's very subtle on Life, and it's even more subtle on Air3 Pro. It's actually a little harder to hear on Air3 Pro if it's passing through anything at all. And as I said, Air3 Pro, very much a relaxed, warm, safe tuning that works really well for music, movies, games, podcasts. It's kind of a general purpose signature. No fatiguing, no rough spots. The whole thing kind of sounds a little smoothed over, kind of like blurring a image almost, where nothing really stands out anymore, but it's just kind of this nice picture, right? It presents music in a really nice way without any sharp points or fatigue points or anything that's really going to distract you. So the not as good. It definitely sounds like many other TWS that you may have or have listened to in the past. And I would call this tuning almost the master of none tuning. It works for lots of things, but it really doesn't excel at any one of them, especially music. It's just kind of okay for music. It's very hard to get some of the things that, as IEM folks, you kind of listen to critically for drivers and tuning and separation and all those things. And like I said, the whole thing sounds a little smoothed over, kind of blurred a little bit, and all those things that, try to find details and separation between instruments, a little harder to find on this set just because of this tuning, which works for everything, but, maybe not the very specific thing that you are looking for. So also the stage is a little small on this one. It's not very dynamic. The sound signature sounds a little compressed almost. I would say that the extension is sort of pulled in a little bit, so you don't get crazy extension on either side, but the dynamic range also sounds a little bit compressed, so it doesn't really extend into fatigue levels at all. Everything is sort of been scrunched into a smaller box, so that all sounds very likable, but if you're looking for big dynamics on instruments, it doesn't quite go there. So compared to Life, like I said, Air3 Pro is definitely ready to go without EQ. I think Life is a little better with EQ for me, but EQ might help on this one as well. I think it gives you a little more treble. Isn't really a bad thing on Air3 Pro. This one is definitely not as bass head as Life. This one has, like I said, the graph actually looks pretty bassy, and it is bassy, but sort of out of the box, listening to general tracks, not as hard hitting as Life at all. This was a nice big dynamic driver. This one's actually a big dynamic driver as well, but not as hard hitting as Life. Definitely more balanced on Air3 Pro is what it comes across as, but it still does big bass when required. Life definitely had this more unique, more of a music experience. I'm sure it works for movies and games and podcasts, but this signature definitely lent itself more toward music and probably movies. Just a bigger, bolder, dynamic sound to it on Life than you get with the traditional sound of Air3 Pro, and but Life was definitely may need a little more EQ, and Life sounds like a technically better dynamic driver. Just for me, this one sounds like a very traditional dynamic driver, a little slower, a little bassier. It's a very likable sound. It's got that kind of blonde-like sound as well. But as far as hearing separation and details and resolution, I think Life is definitely a step ahead of the older Air3 Pro. The sound, I would call it kind of a relaxed V. This one definitely sounds a lot more relaxed than Life does. It's kind of a nice indoor set, where I said this one was a little harder to use indoors without EQ. This one, very much an indoor set. If you're sitting at your desk, taking calls, listening to podcasts, this one is kind of right up your alley. The center of gravity of this one is definitely in the lower mids, right there where the blonde is, right sort of right there where it had that heavy mid bass. The whole center of gravity of tracks tends to be right there, right at the bottom end of the mids. This one would be definitely more at the upper end, and you can almost see it on the graph. Whereas one is sort of down here, Life is definitely kind of more in this area. It's a little brighter, a little, just a little more upper mid center of gravity than what Air3 Pro is. Air3 Pro has this, like I said, that traditional lower, bassier, likable, non-fatiguing sound is right there in the lower mids. So the bass, not too much, not too little, plays well with the mids, and it's a real fun sound. It's like I would say it's that blonde thing. It's not going to be the most technical set, but as far as giving you playing back your music in a very likable, enjoyable way, that's exactly what it does. And this bass level works very well for that. The graph definitely looks big, but generally it sounds less bass heavy than it looks. On normal tracks, it actually doesn't sound all that big. Compared to Life, it doesn't sound nearly as bass heavy as Life does. But until you really put on a bass heavy track, and then that bass really comes out to play and it roars, it comes to life, and it's kind of a huge, big bass sound. And I sort of noticed it on Shape of Your Heart by Joda. I had been listening to this set for a while, and I never really heard the bass hit as hard and as big as it does until I hit that track, and I was like, oh, okay, so this one will go just as hard and as heavy as Life does, but generally with your playlist, it's going to sound a little more reserved than what Life does. So the mids, they're definitely good, but a little more recessed than Life. And again, a lot of it is that center of gravity of this one is just kind of to the left of the mids, and this one is probably a little bit to the right of the mids, and it just brings them a little more forward, a little clearer, a little more detailed. The tuning is definitely not pushed for detail or clarity like Life is. This one is more likable, less fatiguing, more of a natural dynamic driver sound, but you get less separation, less dynamics. It pretty much sounds like other TWSs at the same price point. Detail seekers may need to EQ this one. I would just say it's price appropriate and a nice set as a gift due to the safer mids and how non-fatiguing they are and sort of how natural they are. You can give it to anyone. They could hit play on their playlist and not really notice that there's anything different. It just sounds the way it should. And I think that's just the way this TWS traditional tuning, I think that's exactly what it's good for. Very consumer friendly, no matter who you are, whether you've listened to IAMs or not, it just sounds as it should. So the treble, definitely relaxed. Bump with EQ, push a little more shine and sparkle to the overall sound. Like I said, it's not quite dark, it's just relaxed, and it sounds kind of average. Definitely easier to get lost in a bassier track, and I think that's sort of where Life stood out a little bit more, again, is it just had a couple more decibels in the right places, a little more peak here and there, and those things cut through the bass a little easier than they do on Air 3 Pro. So this one, I think, you could either EQ it, but it doesn't really bother you. It's just a matter of getting lost in a bassier track. Without a bassier track, it's much easier to hear the treble cut through. Definitely an okay indoor set, but for outdoors, I do think the treble probably needs to stand out a little more in noisier environments. I think this one is tuned a little more for an indoor, even a travel situation. But as far as mowing your lawn with this one, I'm not sure the treble is really up there in enough of a V shape to really cut through heavier, noisier environments. So the stage, like I said, this one is mostly in the head, not a multiplier here. I think Life did a super job on stage, and it very much adds to that experience and that new sound that SoundPEATS is doing with Life. This one very much traditional, not a multiplier, and it doesn't really help on the clarity and separation in the mids. Yeah, not too much else to say about it, but having, like I said, I think the extension on both sides was cut in a little bit, and when you cut in the treble just a little bit, I think it does make everything sound a little smaller. Stage gets a little smaller. You don't really get that bump to separation and imaging and all those things that come along with a bigger sounding set. So this one kind of hits you right in the middle of your head, and everything sounds a little smaller and a little more congested, but not too bad. It just sounds like a traditional TWS. Like I said, it sounds like lots of other sets at the same price range. So that's what I got on Air 3 Pro. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.